Okay, don't worry, I'm not going to take her 10 minutes and go on for 20. Okay, so I'm Ruth White with the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare. This is the first time I've ever been on this side of the podium from the great Mark Courtney, so I'm like a little bit nervous, but I think I'll be fine. So I'm actually very happy to follow Caroline and have a chance to say a few nice things about HUD. It's appropriate that I would follow HUD because HUD has a rich history with coupling housing and services that dates back to really the 90s in statute in the Cranston-Gonzalez Affordable Housing Act. So HUD's been running the Family Unification Program pretty much on its own until about 5 years ago when HHS got involved in this work. So I want to thank you for your work. I mean, what we're talking about is a tiny sliver of HUD's portfolio, yet they have Brianna Brenner and Caroline and Amaris, and they must have 5 people working on the Family Unification Program. Then, of course, we have Todd Shank and Jennifer Ho's office also towing the line on this. So I think HUD's doing a great job, so thank you for that. So the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare is only about 5 years old. I like to say everything I learned at the Child Welfare League of America. So this body of work was really born at the Child Welfare League of America. And we realized it sort of outgrew the bounds of that organization. And so with their help, we created the National Center for Housing and Child Welfare, I think in '08. And so our job is to couple housing and child welfare resources, of course, with the understanding that they're also, it's a piece of the puzzle. Maybe housing is the foundation, but there's so many other things that go into it, employment, transportation, and so on. But we really seek to ensure that every family has what they need so that their children don't enter foster care needlessly as a consequence of affordable housing. And then the other half of our mission is to ensure that no child ever ages out of foster care without access, not a plan for housing, but access to safe, decent, affordable housing. And so the way we do that is by shamelessly stealing the ideas of really great programs around the country. So, I see Andrew Johnson from Colorado here, Mile High United Way is here, Lighthouse Youth Services in Cincinnati is a recipient of this grant. I mean, this work has been going on for over 30 years in this country, and so now we have an opportunity to network it and take it to scale. So that's really what our organization is about. I don't think we've ever come up with anything new, so maybe I shouldn't even be speaking. Okay, so with that, the disclaimer here, and this is borne out by Amy and Mark's research. Okay, this doesn't let any of us off the hook to be looking for permanency. In fact, you could begin to imagine that if a young person had a solid plan for housing and a job and they were going to college, you might actually get a couple that will want to adopt them because they're not taking on housing and education and all those other things. And we actually have great things in our law now that allow young people who have been adopted, say at age 18 or 17 and a half, they're still considered an independent student for the purposes of creating, their financial aid package for college. So this doesn't let any of us off the hook. But permanency doesn't let us off the hook for housing. So they have to go hand in hand. So just a little bit about what we've talked about all these horrible outcomes that young people have when they age out of foster care. Well, yeah, of course, because they're up between sort of an unbridgeable gap between the income that they're qualified to earn and the cost of affordable housing. So I'll refer to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition twice today. This is the first time. So every year, the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, their URL is there, cross-references income and housing. And what they find is how much do you have to make per hour working full-time to afford a safe, decent place to live. And this is the fair market rent is really the 40th percentile for apartments. So this is not an opulent place. This is a modest apartment. And so you can see in Hyattsville, Maryland, I happen to live in Hyattsville, so I picked that. It's $26 an hour for a 2-bedroom unit, and that's an affordable part of DC. Sheila Crowley, who runs this organization, once came to a training that we did at the Child Welfare League of America. And the room was filled with case managers from DC, so social workers from DC. And she held up her little map and she said, look, In DC, for example, you have to make $16.68 an hour in order to afford a 2-bedroom apartment. And you know, a lot of the parents we're working with aren't making $16.68 an hour. So one of the social workers in the front row stood up and said, I don't make $16.68 an hour. Okay, so these are really great numbers if you're trying to make the case about why, yes, young people need to toe the line. Yes, young people need to try and work and maybe even work full time and go to school and all these things we expect of them. But the community's going to have to come forward to help them fill that gap, and there's any number of ways to do that. So I'll talk about some of those. Okay, so what can be done at the state level? So off the bat, there are things that don't cost us any money at the state level that we can do. Implement the Fostering Connections to Success Act. I mean, this is maybe going to require states to change their state law. Congratulations, California, for AB 12. I think Pennsylvania is working on something like Senate 75. So, you know, folks are saying, this is a great federal law. If we want to use it to really help young people aging out of foster care and get the maximum benefit out of it, and quite frankly, do the right thing, then we may have to pass law, or we might just have to change the way we're doing business, and I'll talk a little bit about how you can do that to help with housing. Housing has to be a central feature of your independent living curriculum. So when I look at the Midwest study and I see that some of the factors contributing to youth homelessness are that the state independent living curricula don't really meet with the reality of what it's going to take to be out, you know, in the world, making ends meet. They need experience in housing, and so I'll use a great line that Mark Kroner, the other great Mark, if we just do business like Mark Kroner and Mark Courtney, we might be able to fix all this. So Mark Kroner was at Lighthouse Youth Services for like 30 years, and he has a great line. He said, independent living without housing is driver's ed without a car. Okay, so your independent living curriculum, it can't just be running credit reports. It's good we're doing that. But maybe they need experience in actual housing, independent out in the community. But be that as it may, it has to be a central feature. And then there has to be a bi-directional continuum. Okay, so one major failing in whether or not a young person is prepared by their independent living experience is, what if they tell you to just go jump, you know, take a long walk off a short pier at age 18 and they leave? In many states, that's it. You cannot come back and say, you know, I really thought about it. I don't like the, we also don't in our agency use the term couch surfing because it sounds like fun. So we do say doubling up. But, you know, maybe you've exchanged sex for somewhere to live one too many times and you need to get back. I want to get back into the child welfare stream and you can't. So states are now realizing they need some kind of a bi-directional, they need another opportunity for you to get into the Chafee Act or whatever. So you need a bi-directional continuum. And the only way to really do this is statewide or local partnerships with housers, and to use those as a conduit to new and unusual sources of funding. So again, Catherine Heath is going to talk about the opportunity the opportunities that are available to all states under the Fostering Connections to Success Act. But you know, I did a road show for 2 years with Mark Kroner from Lighthouse Youth Services, and it was in one way very inspiring because we learned so much from people and we saw this huge motivation to get kids prepared. But it was also like depressing, and I really had to up my prescription for Prozac, okay? Because people just weren't going to do it. And so they didn't really believe that you could do these amazing things like subsidize rent out in the community using federal Title IV dollars. And we said, well, yeah, you can. No, you can't. So then we'd show them the public law reference, and they'd say, no, you can't do that. And we'd say, you're required to deal with housing 90 days before they age out. No, that's not true. So we went through all the statutory, all the great HHS guidance, and we help people realize you can do this. Okay, so I'm not going to give you all the statutory references. You'll get all that from Catherine later. What I'm going to talk to you about is how to knit all of your resources together so that we use this opportunity that is perhaps extending foster care to age 21, that we use that time as a launching pad and not a parking lot. Because the other thing the Midwest study showed was Illinois, much to their credit, used a great deal of state-level dollars to subsidize housing and keep, this is prior to the Fostering Connections, so on their own dime, they extended foster care to 21. But then when they looked at young people at age 21 in Illinois compared to those other states, and those kids weren't homeless. They were doing great. Okay, But like our alumna in the back row pointed out, but how do they look at 24? Not that good. By about 25, 26, the rates of homelessness are about the same, because Illinois didn't have sort of the research and the understanding at that time. Now they've changed that policy, and Amy's on a committee that's doing just that in Chicago. But the reality is, if we don't make smart use of this time, they're still going to be homeless. So this is just sort of our take on how to do this. So back up the planning process as far as possible. So some states actually have kids out in the community. Ohio comes to mind. At age 16 in independent apartments if they're ready. 17 and 18. But that's not what's going on in most of the country. Most kids would be in foster care, family foster care, or residential group home, whatever. By 18, we need to move them all up to this independent living line. So how do we do that? Well, use your Title $40. And again, HHS's guidance is great, and it gives examples of what you could do. You can do shared housing, independent apartments in the community. I'm talking about a Section 8 type situation where you're subsidizing rent in the community. You can send a check directly to the youth. And so that would take you all the way to age 21. Don't apply a family unification program voucher until a young person gets closer to age 21. And find the services that have to be coupled with this from people in this room who are local community-based providers. Those vouchers are time limited at 18 months. Then you begin to plan properly for, okay, now what is the future going to look like? From their 21st birthday, really their 18th birthday, you're thinking, okay, now we know we have a time limit on these subsidies. What are we doing to prepare this person, and what do they want to do to prepare for age 23, for when they really are going to be independent? Well, some kids aren't going to be independent, so some housing authorities will actually take that 18-month voucher and convert it, move them onto a regular voucher. Okay, if you give them enough time, they can do that. So you could convert that to regular Section 8. You could use some other kind of a subsidy. I'll talk about, my job happily actually is to talk about non-federal resources, because the HUD, other than the vouchers for young people, which turn over every 18 months, the spigot is turned off at HUD. So I will talk about how to use non-federal resources. So there could be other subsidies. They could get a roommate, or private housing, landlord. Is there someone in a local congregation that wants to reduce the rent, that is a property owner, and so on and so forth. But there's really no way of getting around this. You just have to leave no stone unturned. Every single kind of housing option in your community has to be considered, and you have to get a seat at the table. And I will tell you right now that there are permanent supportive housing resources both at the local and federal level, and people are being told those are not available to young people aging out of foster care. They're not even available to youth. That is not true. It's not a statutory requirement. It's people who've gotten a seat at the table and have made those demands on their mayors, their community development directors. Get a seat at the table and make those demands for youth. We're not asking for all the permanent supportive housing resources. We're asking for a modest amount. You might need 5 units. So figure out the scale of your problem and get a seat at the table. I am not going to discuss all of these. What I'm going to do is, again, refer you to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. You can download PDF on every single housing program in the country off of their website. So if you go to something called the Advocates Guide 2013 on their website, even there's an article on the Family Unification Program. But what's great about those articles is every single thing you see listed here, they tell you what it is, how it's used, how you access it, and how you can advocate for more of it. So National Low-Income Housing Coalition website. So I'm going to go through just a few of these and talk about how people have used them for youth in various communities. But before I do, this sort of gives a little bit of a graphic depiction of what Carolyn talked about. So this is the Family Unification Program model for agency partnership. So I think I have a fancy pointer thing. I do. Okay. So this is how it's designed. And it's also used this way for families. So where I have blue, I have young person here. It's very similar for a family. In fact, in Connecticut, they use this exact model for families. So anyway, HUD authorizes the funds and sends those to the local PHAs through a variety, a NOFA process. Again, we're not here to talk about FUP, but anyway. And so before these two public organizations can even apply for this funding, they already have to have formed a partnership and sign on the dotted line on an MOU. So some of you may be in the room, you may be from places where they've said they actually signed this MOU and they didn't get vouchers from HUD. But they still partner, and they still they've still offered maybe a smaller amount of vouchers to it, because they once they started sitting down and realizing we're siloed, but my God, we have exactly the same mission. So how can we work together? And they've also had to submit a statement of need. So they've sometimes met some of these young people, they've got to know them, they understand their stories, and they're motivated to work together. Okay, so. Anyway, so you can get a PDF of this off our website as well. But I want to say that that purple circle right there, the supportive housing program, Caroline mentioned briefings. Some local nonprofits are so involved in this that they're holding the Public Housing Authority briefings at their offices. So these get very intricate, these relationships. But this can be used as a blueprint. This doesn't have to be a housing authority. This could be any housing child welfare partnership, which is why I share it. Okay, making the case. So again, back to Colorado. Jamie Van Leeuwen, who was at Urban Peak, a nonprofit in Denver, did this cost-benefit analysis and found that it's 1/10 of the cost to serve young people in permanent housing with supportive services. And I know I only have 2 minutes, but I have to share a story because I think we've done a lot of data and we haven't told a lot of stories. So this is based on the Urban Peak program, and a couple of years ago I did a Senate briefing on this. And a young woman came up to me and she said, you know, you talked about that Colorado program. I actually participated in that. I graduated from that program. And I said, you're kidding me. Tell me your story. She said, well, let's see. So I aged out of foster care at age 18, and they sent me to a women's shelter. And I hadn't graduated from high school. So I was homeless, hadn't graduated from high school. Urban Peak found me, and they learned my story, and they said, oh my God, we just got this money from HUD. We got the Family Unification program. So she got a voucher, because she was very smart, she graduated, got that taken care of, and then she scored a full scholarship to University of Colorado, and like the rest is history. So it took me a minute, I was a little verklempt, okay, and then I said, well, her name's Latera. I said, Latera, what brings you to Washington, D.C.? She said, oh, I'm a second-year law student at Catholic University of America. So, I mean, if we make these programs work, we're capitalizing on their industriousness, okay, but we have to make these programs work. So, state housing finance agencies operate like a state's bank. They keep capital moving. You can go to you can go to your hometown right now. I bet you'll see a crane, and I bet you'll see some random building going up with housing. It's probably funded by a patchwork quilt that includes money from the State Housing Finance Agency. In New Jersey, we worked with the New Jersey Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency. We just simply made them aware of what was going on. They didn't even know young people were aging out into homelessness in that state. So they used their funding. It was their political will, their decision, their funding to build housing for young people aging out of foster care with disabilities. They just didn't know. The home program, now I'm supposed to talk about non-federal resources, but the reality is the home dollars are federal resources, but the decisions on how to make them are made, how to spend them are made at the local and state level. So Jeb Bush, when he was in Florida, someone introduced him to young people on the Road to Independence program, that's their Chafee Act, and he was inspired and disgusted, quite frankly, about what was going on in that state. So he set aside money, 5% of the home dollars under his jurisdiction, to subsidize rent for young people, and they actually coupled that with tax credits. The low-income housing tax credit is the biggest generator, as Caroline said, of affordable housing in the country right now. It's actually been the case for a long time. In New York City, someone asked about data matching. I think it was you. Somebody asked about AFCARs. Just want to say that the New York City Housing Authority, the Department of Homeless Services in New York, and the Administration for Children's Services did a data match. Okay, you can do a data match. And what they found was, oh my God, like half of our kids are going straight from public child welfare to the public homeless shelter system in New York. And they used the Dartington method to study the intersection of housing and child welfare, which my colleague Deborah Harberger is trained on, I believe, so if you need a consultant. But they realized housing was a really big problem. And so they went to the New York City Housing Authority, they worked together, they set aside Section 8 vouchers. They created a local preference for both Section 8 and public housing, and then they used that to leverage tax credits. Because what tax credits will often get you is the money to build the housing, but it doesn't cover your operating subsidy. So they were able to get young people aging out of foster care, housed in Manhattan, in a building built by a nonprofit developer called the Lantern Group, using the low-income housing tax credit coupled with the Section 8 eligibility. Okay, so we can use all these things together. And again, tax credits, local decisions. Okay, local housing trust funds, again, go to the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And then I just want to say a quick word about corporate partners and private businesses. You have entities in your state like the Ohio Capital Corporation on Housing. These are private entities that have housing money that can be used for any population they so choose. So get a seat at the table for youth with these private developers and get this money. Final thoughts on where to start. All these great programs around the country that I have shamelessly stolen and plagiarized from, go visit them. They're more than happy to share their program model because they don't want young people aging out of foster care. They don't want their fate to be tied to geography. They want to share these ideas so that other youth can benefit from them. And I think I'll close with two thoughts. One is, this is about partnership, progress through partnership. This isn't about turning child welfare into housing agencies, okay? It's first final thought. Final thought is, you didn't really hear me talk too much about homeless resources. Okay, youth are eligible, get a seat at the table. Don't let anyone tell you they're not eligible, but why? Okay, Title 4E is a huge $8 billion or something. Use that money and prepare youth adequately so they don't need the homeless resources, okay? Now, that being said, if you need to access them, call me and I'll walk you through the process. There's my contact information. So I think we're going to take questions.